Hello. I'm back. I know it's been a while. I'm sorry about that. And I have no excuse. I just had to take a break. And so, yeah, I took a break. But I'm back. And, am I? It's kind of hard to see. One moment, let me try something. Okay, yeah. You try different lighting, and it just I have to figure out how to do lighting. That's one of the things that I need to figure out. Anyways, that's neither here nor there. Again, the main purpose is not to do much. Well, no, really, the main purpose is just to read books. It would be nice if you can see me, though. Yes, I will admit. So, but it's getting closer. And we got this much left. So we are on chapter 8. Oh, hello shenanigans. Chapter 8. So I can probably do 2 chapters because this is 8. Well, you know what? I'm just gonna see how much I can sit through. I've got my water. Oh, do I have my pen? No. I got a pen. Let's hope it doesn't fall this time around. Okay. Chapter 8. Oh, rescue her! I am her brother now, and you her father. Every gentle maid should have a guardian, and each gentleman. Now, every gentle maid should have a guardian, and each gentleman. That sounds like something that fits Dr. John Watson. I've been listening to a lot of Sherlock Holmes lately, so I'm kind of a bit of a fangirl for Dr. Watson. It was wonderful to Sir James Chatham how well he continued to like going to the Grange, after he had once encountered the difficulty of seeing Dorothea for the first time in the light of a woman who was engaged to another man. Of course, the forked lightning seemed to pass through him when he first approached her, and he remained conscious throughout the interview of hiding uneasiness. But good as he was, it must be owned that his uneasiness was less than it would have been if he had thought his rival a brilliant and desirable match. He had no sense of being eclipsed by Mr. Casaubon. He was only shocked that Dorothea was under a melancholy illusion, and his mortification lost some of its bitterness by being mingled with compassion. Nevertheless, while Sir James said to himself that he had completely resigned her, since with the perversity of a Desdemona, she had not effected a proposed match that was clearly suitable and according to nature. He could not yet be quite passive under the idea of her engagement to Mr. Casaubon. On the day when he first saw them together, in the light of his present knowledge, it seemed to him that he had not taken the affair seriously enough. Brooke was really culpable. He ought to have hindered it. Who could speak to him? Something must be done, perhaps even now, at least to defer the marriage. On his way home, he turned into the rectory and asked for Mr. Cadwallader. Happily, the rector was at home, and his visitor was shown to the study where all the fishing tackle hung. But he himself was in a little room adjoining, at work with his turning apparatus, and he called to the baronet to join him there. The two were better friends than any other landholder and clergyman in the county. A significant fact which was in agreement with the amiable expression on their faces. Mr. Cadwallader was a large man, with full lips and a sweet smile, very plain and rough in his exterior, but with the solid, imperturbable ease and good humor which is infectious and, like great grassy hills in the sunshine, quiets even an irritated egoism, and makes it rather ashamed of itself. "Well, how are you?" he said, showing a hand not quite fit to be grasped. "Sorry I missed you before. Is there anything in particular? You look vexed." Sir James Brown had a little crease in it, a little depression of the eyebrow, which he seemed purposely to exaggerate as he answered, "It is only this conduct of Brooks. I really think somebody should speak to him." "What? Meaning to stand?" said Mr. Cadwallader, going on with the arrangement of the reel which he had been going on with the arrangement of the reels which he had just been turning. "I hardly think he means it. But where's the harm if he likes it? Anyone who objects to Whiggery should be glad when the Whigs don't put up the strongest fellow. They won't overturn the Constitution with our friend Brooks' head for a battering ram." "Oh, I don't mean that," said Sir James, who, after putting down his hat and throwing himself into a chair, had begun to nurse his leg and examine the sole of his boot with much bitterness. "I mean this marriage. I mean his letting that blooming young girl marry Casaubon." "What's the matter with Casaubon? I see no harm in him, if the girl likes him." "She is too young to know what she likes. Her guardian ought to interfere. He ought not to allow the thing to be done in this headlong manner. I wonder a man like you, Cadwallader, a man with daughters, can look at this affair with indifference, and with such a heart as yours. Do you think seriously about it? No. Do think seriously about it." "I'm not joking. I am as serious as possible," said the rector, with a provoking inward laugh. "You are as bad as Eleanor. She had been wanting me to go and lecture Brooke, and I have reminded her that her friends had a very poor opinion of the match she made when she married me." Okay, we have a name, and hold on a moment. I hear someone outside. Let me mute myself. Okay, I'm back. So we have an E. I think we already did an Eleanor. You know what? I don't care. But look at Casaubon, said Sir James indignantly. He must be 50. I don't believe he could ever have been much more than a shadow of a man. Look at his legs. Confound you handsome young fellows. You think of having it all your way with the world. You don't understand women. They don't admire you half so much as you admire yourselves. Eleanor used to tell her sisters that she married me for my ugliness. It was so various and amusing that it had quite conquered her prudence. You? It was easy enough for a woman to love you, but this is no question of beauty. I don't like Casaubon. This was Sir James's strongest way of implying that he thought ill of the man's character. Why? What do you know against him? Said the rector, laying down his reels and putting his thumb into his armholes with an air of attention. Sir James paused. He did not usually find it easy to give his reasons. It seemed to him strange that people should not know them without being told. Since he only felt that it was reasonable. At last he said, "Now, Cadwallader, has he got any heart?" "Well, yes. I don't mean it's the melting sort, but a sound kernel. That you may be sure of. He is very good to his poor relations, pensions several of the women, and is educating a young fellow at a good deal of expense. Casaubon acts upon his sense of justice. His mother's sister made a bad match. A Pole, I think. Lost herself, at any rate, was disowned by her family. If it had not been for that, Casaubon would not have had so much money by half. I believe he went himself to find out his cousins and see what he could do for them. Every man would not ring so well as that, if he tried his mettle. You would, Chettam, but not every man." "I don't know," said Sir James, colouring. "I'm not sure of myself." He paused for a moment and then added, "That was a right thing for Casaubon to do. But a man may wish to do what is right, and yet be a sort of parchment code. A woman may not be happy with him. And I think when a girl is so young as Miss Brooke is, her friends ought to interfere a little to hinder her from doing anything foolish. You laugh because you fancy I have some feelings of my own account. But upon my honor it is not that. I should feel just the same as if I were Mrs. Brooke's brother and uncle." "Well, but what should you do?" "I should say that the marriage must not be decided on until she was of age, and depend upon it, in that case, it would never come off. I wish you saw it as I do. I wish you would talk to Brooke about it." Sir James rose as he was finishing his sentence, for he saw Mrs. Cadwallader entering the study. She held by the hand her youngest girl, about 5 years old, who immediately ran to Papa and was making comfortable on his knees. "I hear what you are talking about," said the wife, "but you will make no impression on Humphrey. As long as the fish rise to his bait, everybody is what he ought to be. Bless you, Casaubon has got a trout stream and does not care about fishing in it himself. Could there be a better fellow?" Yeah, I probably already have Humphrey. That was like the only H I have so far. "Well, there is something in that," said the rector with his quiet inward laugh. "It is a very good quality in a man to have a trout stream." "But seriously," said Sir James with vexation, whose vexation has not yet spent itself, "don't you think the rector might do some good by speaking?" "Oh, I told you beforehand what would be said," answered Mrs. Cadwallader, lifting her eyebrows. "I have done what I could. I wash my hands of the marriage." "In the first place," said the rector, looking rather grave, "it would be nonsensical to expect that I could convince Brooke and make him act accordingly. Brooke is a very good fellow, but pulpy. He would run into any mold, but he wouldn't keep shape." "He might keep shape long enough to defer the marriage," said Sir James. But, my dear Chatham, why should I use my influence to Casaubon's disadvantage? Unless I was much surer than I am that I should be acting for the advantage of Mrs. Brooke. I know no harm of Casaubon. I do not care about his Zythurus and his fee-fo-fums and the rest. But then he doesn't care about my fishing tackle. And to the line, he took on the Catholic question. As to the line he took on the Catholic question, and that was unexpected, but he has always been civil to me, and I don't see why I should spoil his sport. For anything I can tell, Miss Brooke may be happier with him than she would be with any other man. Humphrey! I have no patience with you. You know you would rather dine under the hedge than with Casaubon alone. You have nothing to say to each other. What does that have to do with Mrs. Brooke's marrying him? She does not do it for my amusement. He has got no good red blood in his body, said Sir James. No, somebody put a drop under the magnifying glass, and it was all semicolons and parentheses, said Mrs. Cadwallader. Oh, that's a good one. Why does he not bring out his book instead of marrying? Said Sir James, with disgust which he held warranted by the sound feelings of an English layman. Oh, he dreams footnotes, and they all run away with all his brains. They say when he was a little boy, he made an abstract of Hop o' my thumb, and they've been making abstracts ever since. Ugh. And what is the man Humphrey goes on saying that a woman may be happy with? And that is the man Humphrey goes on saying that women may be happy with. Well, he is what Miss Brooke likes, said the rector. I don't profess to understand every young lady's taste. But if she were your own daughter, said Sir James, that would be a different affair. She is not my daughter, and I don't feel called upon to interfere. Casaubon is as good as most of us. He is a scholarly clergyman, and creditable to the cloth. Some radical fellow speechifying at Middlemarch said Casaubon was the learned straw-chopping incumbent, and Freck the brick-and-mortar incumbent, and I was the angling incumbent. And upon my word, I don't see that one is worse or better than the other. The rector ended with his silent laugh. He always saw the joke in any satire against himself. His conscience was large and easy, like the rest of him. It did only what it could do without any trouble. Clearly, there would be no interference with Mrs. Brooke's marriage through Mr. Cadwallader, and Sir James felt with some sadness that she was to have perfect liberty of misjudgment. It was a sign of his good disposition that he did not slacken at all in his intention of carrying out Dorothea's designs of the cottages. Doubtless this persistence was the best course for his own dignity, but pride only helps us to be generous. It never makes us so, any more than vanity makes us witty. She was now enough aware of Sir James's position with regard to her, and appreciated the rectitude in his perseverance in a landlord's duty to which he had first been urged by a lover's compliance. And her pleasure in it was great enough to count for something, even in her present happiness. Perhaps she gave to Sir James Chetham's cottages all the interest she can spare from Mr. Casaubon, or rather from the symphony of hopeful dreams, admiring trust, and passionate self-devotion which that learned gentleman had set playing on her soul. Hence it happened that in the good baronet's succeeding visits, while he was beginning to pay small attentions to Celia, that he found himself talking with more and more pleasure to Dorothea. She was perfectly unconstrained and without irritation towards him now, and he was gradually discovering the delight there is in frank kindness and companionship between a man and a woman who have no passion to hide or confess. Okay, I'm just going to take a water break from that. Okay. Got water all over me. At least not on the book. Okay. So we are now chapter 9. First gent. In ancient land and ancient articles, it's called law-thirsty. All the struggle here was after order and a perfect rule. Pray, where lies such lands now? Second gent. Why, where would they lay of old? In human souls. Mr. Casaubon's behavior about the settlements was highly satisfactory to Mr. Brooke, and the preliminaries of marriage rolled smoothly along, shortening the weeks of courtship. The betrothed bride must see her future home and dictate any changes that she would like to have made there. A woman dictates before marriage in order that she may have an appetite for submission afterwards. And certainly the mistakes that we male and female mortals make when we have our own way might fairly raise some wonder that we are so fond of it. On a gray but dry November morning, Dorothea drove to Lowick, in company with her uncle and Celia. Mr. Casaubon's home was the manor house. Close by, visible from some parts of the garden, was the little church with the old parsonage opposite. In the beginning of his career, Mr. Casaubon had only held the living, but the death of his brother put him in possession of the manor also. It had a small park with a fine old oak tree here and there, and an avenue of limes towards the southwest front, with a sunk fence between park and pleasure ground, so that from the drawing room windows the glance swept uninterruptedly along a slope of greensward till the limes ended with a level of corn and pastures, which often seemed to melt into a lake under the setting sun. This was the happy side of the house, for the south and east looked rather melancholy even under the brightest morning. The grounds here were more confined. The flower beds showed no very careful tendance, and large clumps of trees, chiefly sombre yews, had risen high, not 10 yards from the windows. The building, of greenish stone, was in the old English style, not ugly, but small-windowed and melancholy looking, the sort of house that must have children, many flowers, open windows, and little vistas of bright things to make it seem a joyous home. In this latter end of autumn, with a sparse remnant of yellow leaves falling slowly athwart the dark evergreens in a stillness without sunshine, the house, too, had an air of autumnal decline, and Mr. Casaubon, when he presented himself, had no bloom that could be thrown into relief by that background. "Oh dear," Celia said to herself, "I am sure Freshet Hall would have been pleasanter than this." She thought of the white freestone, the pillared portico, and the terrace full of flowers, Sir James smiling above them like a prince issuing from his enchantment in a rose-bush, with a handkerchief swiftly metamorphosed from the most delicately odorous petals. Sir James, who talked so agreeably always about things which had common sense in them, and not about learning. Celia had those light young feminine tastes which grave and weather-worn gentlemen sometimes preferred in a wife, But happily Mr. Casaubon's biases had been different, for he would have had no chance with Celia. Dorothea, on the contrary, found the house and grounds all that she could have wished. The dark bookshelves in the long library, the carpets and curtains with colors subdued by time, the curious old maps and bird's eye views on the walls of the corridors, with here and there an old vase below, had no oppression for her, and seemed more cheerful than the casts and pictures at the Grange, which her uncle had long ago brought home from his travels, they being probably among the ideals he had taken in at one time. To poor Dorothea, these severe classical nudities and smirking Renaissance correggiosities. I think that is an Italian word. Correggiosities. The Renaissance correggiosities were plainly inexplicable, staring into the mist of her puritanic conceptions. Think of the children! Oh, God. It's like someone wants to put a fig leaf on the statue of David because he's got his wang out. Because he's too woke for the world. Nothing saying you can't appreciate a good-looking human body. She had never been taught how she could bring them into any sort of relevance with her life. But the owners of Lowick apparently had not been travelers, and Mr. Casaubon's studies of the past were not carried on by means of such aids. Dorothea walked about the house with a delightful emotion. Everything seemed hallowed to her. This was to be the home of her wifehood, and she looked up with eyes full of confidence to Mr. Casaubon when he drew her attention specifically to some actual arrangement and asked her if she would like an alteration. All appeals to her taste she met gratefully, but saw nothing to alter. His efforts to extract courtesy and formal tenderness had no defect for her. She filled up all blanks with unmanifested perfections, interpreting him as she interpreted the works of Providence, and accounting for the seeming discords of her own deafness to the higher harmonies. And there are many blanks left in the weeks of courtship, which a loving faith fills with happy assurance. Now, my dear Dorothea, I wish you to favor me by pointing out which room you would like to have as your boudoir. Which would you like to have as your room? Said Mr. Casaubon, showing that his views of the womanly nature were sufficiently large to include that requirement. It is very kind of you to think of that, said Dorothea, but I assure you that I would rather have all those matters decided for me. I shall be much happier to take everything as it is, just as you have been used to it, or as you will yourself choose it to be. I have no motive for wishing anything else. Oh, Dodo, said Celia, will you not have the bow-windowed room upstairs? Mr. Casaubon led the way hither. The bow window looked down the avenue of limes. The furniture was all of a faded blue, and there were miniatures of ladies and gentlemen with powdered hair hanging in a group. A piece of tapestry over a door also showed a blue-green world with a pale stag in it. The chairs and tables were thin-legged and easy to upset. It was a room where one might fancy the ghost of a tight-laced lady revisiting the scene of her embroidery. A light bookcase contained duodecimal volumes of polite literature in calf, completing the furniture. "Yes," said Mr. Brooke, "this would be a pretty room, with some new hangings, sofa, and that sort of thing. A little bare now." "No, uncle," said Dorothea eagerly. "Pray do not speak of altering anything. There are so many other things in this world that want altering. I like to take things as they are, and you like them as they are, don't? And you like them as they are, don't you?" she added, looking at Mr. Casaubon. "Perhaps this was your mother's room when she was young?" "It was," he said, with a slow bend of his head. "This is your mother," said Dorothea, who had turned to examine a group of miniatures. "It is like the tiny one you brought me, only I should think a better portrait. And this one opposite, who is this?" "Her elder sister. They were like you and your sister, the only two children of their parents, who hang above them, you see." "The sister is pretty," said Celia, implying that she thought less favorably of Mr. Casaubon's mother. It was a new opening to Celia's imagination that he came of a family who had all been young in their time, the ladies wearing necklaces. "It is a peculiar face," said Dorothea, looking closely. "Those deep gray eyes rather near together, and the delicate irregular nose with a sort of ripple in it, and all the powdered curls hanging backward, although it seems to me peculiar rather than pretty. There was not even a family likeness between her and your mother. No, they were not alike in their lot." "You do not mention her to me," said Dorothea. "My aunt made an unfortunate marriage. I never saw her." Dorothea wondered a little, but felt that it would be indelicate just then to ask for any information, which Mr. Casaubon did not prefer, and she turned to the window to admire the view. The sun had lately pierced the gray sky, and the avenue of limes cast shadows. "Shall we not walk in the garden now?" said Dorothea. "And you would like to see the church, you know," said Mr. Brooke. "It is a droll little church, and the village. It all lies in a nutshell. By the way, it will suit you, Dorothea, for the cottages are like a row of almshouses, little gardens, gillyflowers, and that sort of thing." "Yes, please," said Dorothea, looking at Mr. Casaubon. "I should like to see all that." She had got nothing from him more graphic about Lowick cottages than they were not bad. They were soon on a gravel walk which led chiefly between grassy borders and clumps of trees, this being the nearest way to the church, Mr. Casaubon said. At the little gate leading to the churchyard there was a pause while Mr. Casaubon went to the parsonage close by to fetch a key. Celia, who had been hanging a little in the rear, came up presently when she saw that Mr. Casaubon was gone away, and said in her easy staccato, which always seemed to contradict the suspicion of any malicious intent, "Do you know, Dorothea, I saw someone quite young coming up one of the walks." "Is that astounding, Celia?" "There may be a young gardener, you know." "Why not?" said Mr. Brooke. "I told Casaubon he should change his gardener." "No, not a gardener," said Celia. "A gentleman with a sketchbook. He has light brown curls. I only saw his back, but he was quite young." "The curate's son, perhaps," said Mr. Brooke. "Ah, there's Casaubon again, and Tucker with him. He is going to introduce Tucker. You don't know Tucker yet." Mr. Tucker was a middle-aged curate, one of the inferior clergy, who are usually not wanting in sons. But after the introductions, the conversation did not lead to any questions about his family, and the startling apparition of youthfulness was forgotten by everyone but Celia. She was inwardly declined to believe that the light brown curls and slim figure could have been any relationship to Mr. Tucker, who was just as old and musty looking as she would have expected Mr. Casaubon's curate to be. Doubtless an excellent man who would go to heaven, for Celia wished not to be unprincipled. But the corners of his mouth were so unpleasant. Celia thought, with some dismalness, of the time she should have to spend as a bridesmaid at Lowick, where the curate had probably no pretty little children whom she could like, irrepressive of principle. Oh, okay, I'm gonna just take a water break. This one's a little longer. Okay. Mr. Tucker was invaluable in their walk, and perhaps Mr. Casaubon had not been without foresight on this head, the curate being able to answer all Dorothea's questions about the village and other parishioners. Everybody, he assured her, was well off in Lowick. Not a cottager in those double cottages at a low rent, but kept a pig, and the strips of garden at the back were well tended. And the small boys wore excellent corduroy. The girls went out as tidy servants, or did little straw plaiting at home. No loom here, no dissent. And though the public disposition was rather towards laying by money than towards spirituality, there was not much vice. The speckled fowls were so numerous that Mr. Brooke observed, "Your farmers leave some barley for the women to glean, I see. The poor folk here might have a fowl in their pot, as the good French king used to wish for all his people." "The French eat a good many fowls. Skinny fowls, you know." I think it was a very cheap wish of his," said Dorothea indignantly. "A king such monsters like that a wish like that must be reckoned as a royal virtue." "And if he wished them a skinny fowl," said Celia, "that would not be nice." "But perhaps he wished them to have fat fowls." "Yes, but the word has dropped out of the text, or perhaps it was subauditum. That is, present in the king's mind, but never uttered," said Mr. Casaubon, smiling and bending his head towards Celia, who immediately dropped backwards a little, because she could not bear Mr. Casaubon to blink at her. Dorothea sank into silence on the way back to the house. She had felt some disappointment, of which she was yet ashamed that there was nothing for her to do in Lowick, and in the next few minutes her mind had glanced over the possibilities which she would have preferred of finding that her home would be in a parish which had a larger share of the world's misery, so that she might have had more active duties in it. Then, recurring to the future actually before her, she made a picture of more complete devotion to Mr. Casaubon's aim, in which she would await new duties. Many such might reveal themselves to the higher knowledge gained by her in that companionship. Mr. Tucker soon left them, having some clerical work which would not allow him to lunch at the hall, and as they were returning to the garden through the little gate, Mr. Casaubon said, "You seem a little sad, Dorothea. I trust you are pleased with what you have seen." "I am feeling something which is perhaps foolish and wrong," answered Dorothea with her usual openness, "almost wishing that the people wanted more to be done for them here. I have known so few ways of making my life good for anything. Of course, my notions of usefulness must be narrow. I must learn new ways of helping people." "Doubtless," said Mr. Casaubon, "each position has its corresponding duties. Yours, I trust, as mistress of Lowick, will not have any yearning unfulfilled." "Indeed, I believe that," Dorothea said earnestly. Do not suppose that I am sad." "That is well, but if you are not tired, we will take another way to the house, that by which we came." Dorothea was not at all tired, and a little circuit was made towards the fine yew tree, the chief hereditary glory of the ground on this side of the house. As they approached it, a figure, conspicuously on a dark background of evergreens, was seated on a bench, sketching the old tree. Mr. Brooke, who was walking in front with Celia, turned his head and said, "Who is that younger Casaubon?" They had come very near when Mr. Casaubon answered, "That is a young relative of mine, a second cousin, the grandson, in fact," he added, looking at Dorothea, "of the lady whose portrait you had been noticing, my Aunt Julia." Okay, we have a new name. Oh, and that's the last of the J's. The young man had laid down his sketchbook and risen. His bushy, light brown curls, as well as his youthfulness, identified at once as Celia's apparition. "Dorothea, let me introduce you to my cousin, Mr. Ladislaw. Will, this is Brooke." And his name is Will, which is a W. The cousin, so close now that when he lifted his hat, Dorothea could see a pair of gray eyes rather near together, a delicate, irregular nose with a little ripple in it, and hair falling backwards. But there was a mouth and chin of a more prominent, threatening aspect that belonged to the type of the grandmother's miniature. Young Ladislaw did not feel it necessary to smile, as if he were charmed by this introduction to his future second cousin and his relatives, but wore a pouting air of discontent. "You are an artist, I see," said Mr. Brooke, taking up the sketchbook and turning it over in his unceremonious fashion. "No, I only sketch a little. There is nothing fit to be seen there," said young Ladislaw, coloring, perhaps with temper rather than modesty. "Oh, come, this is a nice bit, now. I did a little in this way myself at once, you know. Look here, now, this is what I call a nice thing, done with what we would call brio, liveliness." Mr. Brooke held out towards the two girls a large colored sketch of a stony ground and trees with a pool. "I am no judge of these things," said Dorothea, not coldly, but with an eager deprivation of the appeal to her. "You know, uncle, I never see the beauty of those pictures which you say are so much praised. They are a language I do not understand. I suppose there is some relation between pictures and nature which I am too ignorant to feel, just as you see what a Greek sentence stands for, which means nothing to me." Dorothea looked up at Mr. Casaubon, who bowed his head towards her, while Mr. Brooke said, smiling nonchalantly, "Bless me now, how different people are. But you had a bad style of teaching, you know. Else this is just the thing for girls, sketching, fine art, and so on. But you took to drawing plants. You don't understand. Okay, this is definitely an Italian word. Morbidezia. Morbidezia. Or lifelike delicacy and the softness of painting. And that kind of thing. You will come to my house, I hope, and I will show you what I did in this way," he continued, turning to young Ladislaw, who had to be recalled from his preoccupation in observing Dorothea. Ladislaw had made up his mind that she must be an unpleasant girl, since she was going to marry Casaubon, and what she said of her stupidity about pictures would have confirmed that opinion even if he had believed her. As it was, he took her words for a covert judgment, and was certain that she thought his sketch detestable. There was too much cleverness in her apology. She was laughing both at her uncle and himself. But what a voice! It was like the voice of a soul that had once lived in an Aeolian harp. Apparently it is a harp that is played by it's basically a wind chime. That's a harp. A harp chime. At least according to the footnote of this book. There must be one of nature's inconsistencies. There could be no sort of passion in a girl who would marry Casaubon. But he turned from her and bowed his thanks for Mr. Brooke's invitation. We will turn over my Italian engravings together, continued that good-natured man. I have no end of those things that I have laid by for the years. One gets rusty in this part of the country, you know. Not you, Casaubon. You stick to your studies. But my best ideas get undermost. Out of use, you know. You clever young men must guard against indolence. I was too indolent, you know. Else I might have been anywhere at one time. What a reasonable admonition, said Mr. Casaubon. But now we will pass on to the house, lest the young ladies should be tired of standing. When their backs were turned, young Ladislaw sat down to go on with his sketching, and as he did so, his face broke into an expression of amusement, which increased as he went on drawing, till at last he threw back his head and laughed aloud. Partly it was the reception of his own artistic production that tickled him, partly the notion of his grave cousin as the lover of that girl, and partially Mr. Brooke's definition of the place that he might have held out but for the impediment of indolence. Mr. Will Ladislaw's sense of ludicrous lit up his features very agreeably. It was the pure enjoyment of comicality, and it had no mixture of sneering and self-exaltation. What is your nephew going to do with himself, Casaubon? Said Mr. Brooke as they went on. My cousin, you mean, not my nephew. Yes, cousin. But in the way of career, you know. The answer to that question is painfully doubtful. On leaving Rugby, he declined to go to an English university, where I would have gladly have placed him, and chose what I must consider the anomalous course of studying at Heidelberg. And now he wants to go abroad again, without any special object, save the vague purpose of what he calls cultural preparation for what he knows not. He declines to choose a profession. He has no means by what you furnish, I suppose. I have always given him and his friends reason to understand that I would furnish in moderation what was necessary for providing him with a scholarly education and launching him respectfully. I am therefore bound to fulfill the expectation so raised, said Mr. Casaubon, putting his conduct in the light of mere vicissitude, a trait of delicacy which Dorothea noticed with admiration. He has a thirst for traveling. Perhaps he may turn out a Bruce or a Mungo Park, said Mr. Brooke. I had a notion of that myself at one time. No, he has no bent towards exploration or the enlightenment of our Geonostus. That would be a special purpose which I could recognize with some approbation, though without felicitating him on a career which so often ends in premature and violent death. But so far is he from having any desire for a more accurate knowledge of the earth's surface, that he said he should prefer not to know the sources of the Nile, and that there should be some unknown regions preserved as hunting grounds for the poetic imagination. Well, there is something in that, you know, said Mr. Brooke, who had certainly an impractical mind. It is, I fear, nothing more than a part of his general inaccuracy and indisposition to thoroughness of all kind, which would be a bad augury for him in any profession, civil or sacred, even were he so far submissive to ordinary rule as to choose one. Perhaps he has conscientious scruples founded in his own unfitness, said Dorothea, who was interesting herself in finding a favorable explanation, because the laws and medicine should be very serious professions to undertake, should they not? People's lives and fortunes depend on them. Doubtless, but I fear that my young relative, Will Ladislaw, is chiefly determined in his aversions to these callings by a dislike to steady application, to that kind of acquirement which is needful instrumentally, but not charming or immediate inviting to self-indulgent taste. I have insisted to him on what Aristotle has stated with admirable brevity, that for an achievement of any work rewarded as an end, there must be a prior exercise of many energies or acquired facilities of a secondary order, demanding patience. I have pointed to my own manuscript volumes, which represents the toil of years preparing to a work not yet accomplished, but in vain. To careful reasoning of this kind he replies by calling himself Pagorus, in every form of prescribed work, hardness. Okay, I don't quite understand that one. Celia laughed. She was surprised to find that Mr. Casaubon could say something quite amusing. Well, you know, he may turn out a Bryan or a Chatterton, a Churchill, that sort of thing. There's no telling, said Mr. Brooke. Shall you let him go to Italy, or wherever he wants to go? Yes, I have agreed to furnish him with moderate supplies for a year or so. He asks no more. I shall let him be tried by the test of freedom. That is very kind of you, said Dorothea, looking up at Mr. Casaubon with delight. It is noble. After all, people may really have in them some vocation which is not quite plain to themselves, may they not? They may seem idle and weak because they are growing. We should be very patient with each other, I think. I suppose it is being engaged to be married that has made you think patience good, said Celia, as soon as she and Dorothea were alone together, taking off their wrappings. You mean that I have been very impatient, Celia? Yes. When people don't do and say just as you like. Celia had become less afraid of saying things to Dorothea since the engagement. Cleverness seemed to her more pitiable than ever. Okay, that is that. How much longer? Hey, next chapter is pretty long. It might just be a one. Yep. Yeah, no, I'm not going to read the next chapter. That one's pretty long. That's going to be probably its own sitting. Alright. That's 2 chapters. 2 down. And not as bad as... I mean, word-wise. Not as... a little annoying, but not as bad. Like less me yelling at Dorothea. I guess because it was more the other characters, which makes it so much more bearable. How many chapters are in this book? 12. And we are on chapter 10. We can probably... again, we'll see how the next week turns out. Anyways, thank you for listening, and I have a great afternoon.